Welcome to Opening Voices. I'm Quentin Adams, the CEO of Clever Cloud, and today I am inviting André Loesekrug-Pietri. André is the leader of JEDI, Joint European Disruptive Initiative. The goal is to create a European DARPA. That's a good idea. Hi everyone, this is the pilot episode of the new podcast we try to do about tech in Europe and does our technology or research is able to work. And for this first episode, we have someone very special because it's very on the subject, which is André Loesekrug-Pietri.
Hello, Quentin.
And you are the leader of a group called JEDI, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So you are JEDI.
Yes, so to shortly introduce the Joint European Disruptive Initiative, Quentin, also called as JEDI. So we are a foundation and we fund advanced research program in science and technology. And the purpose is to ensure that France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Europe as a whole remains a leader in the current technological acceleration we're witnessing. We have three main areas of activity. One is energy and environment, two, life sciences and synthetic biology, and three, computing, which encompasses AI, cyber, quantum, but also semiconductors.
So the JEDI itself is a foundation, so it's a non-governmental, non-profitable organization. How does JEDI have been created? And after we will discuss about how does it work.
So the whole idea is already a couple of years old, is we witnessed this acceleration of time, of technology. The fact that technology is increasingly not just an economic topic, but increasingly a transversal topic, which is fundamental for our national security, for our democratic future. That's how political opinions are formed increasingly. And so it's absolutely essential for the future of our societies. That's why it's a societal, it's almost a political project to ensure that we remain top of the game. Because we think that when we are top of the game, we can decide the future we want. We want to make sure that Europe is not just under pressure of others who are shaping the global agenda, but that we ensure that we shape as a society, as citizens, as countries, as European Union, that we shape the future in this technological century. And for that, and that's the main thing to remember about JEDI, we use a methodology to fund and support advanced science and advanced technology, which is radically different than the traditional way we fund research in Europe.
When you say it's radically different, it's a methodology you have get inspiration from another way, or
No, absolutely. I mean, when we created JEDI, is we got inspiration from an agency in the US, which is called DARPA, the Advanced Research Project Agency, which was set up in '58 when basically the US experienced what they call the Sputnik Shock. The Sputnik Shock, when the Soviets at that time launched the first satellite, suddenly actually the US continent became vulnerable to potential attacks from outside. So the president at that time, Eisenhower, decided to set up a very small entity with a very simple objective: no technological surprise. So the objective of the advanced...
So the point was not discovering stuff, but not being surprised.
Not being surprised. That means always being the one who is setting the agenda. Always looking forward what could be the next scientific and technological breakthroughs to ensure that the US at that time and democracies in general remain forerunners. And out of DARPA came out most of the major disruptive innovation we know today. The two famous ones is the internet, which was before called ARPANET because of ARPA. The GPS, the fact to geolocalize...
The internet, but majority of the research on the internet was from a French group
exactly
called Cyclade Network.
And we could have many of these examples. I mean, what ARPA and what JEDI is now doing is we don't try to invent radically new things. We want to accelerate current research and technology being done within science universities, labs, within the deep tech startup ecosystem, but also within industry, and have a very focused purpose objective saying, okay, can we find new materials for the energy transition? Can we do AI with 1 million times less energy consumed? And what we try is to actually to accelerate. And I talked about this methodology. The methodology is to consider speed as important as the money we invest, which is rather good news, especially in times where we are constrained by budgets. Secondly, to not wait for people to apply, but to ensure that we go to the best teams. Our indicator of performance is to ensure that the best work on the same topic.
So in the case, for example, of Cyclad and Internet, it's basically not the researcher of Datagram from Cyclad. They have been rich, and the project have been empowered by the DARPA, and then it become ARPANET.
We have many examples.
They're rich, and
they give an objective, they give funding for that. They have a scientist, that is the third thing on the methodology, go out to the best, speed, and also have these programs not run by bureaucrats, but run by scientists themselves, who won't care about the way to do it, but they will care much more than others, than traditional research programs, on what is the technological roadmap, are you making progress, have you thought about radically different ways? And the fourth part of the methodology is, instead of betting everything on one team, you mentioned one, there are often on a program 4, 5, 10 different approaches which are supported at the same time. Because what we want to make sure is not to pick the winner, but to ensure that we reach the objective with very different approaches. You mentioned about internet, but we can give other examples of ARPA projects that were run by Europeans. Everybody knows the man-machine interface on some of our smartphones. Siri was actually something developed by a team in the US, but with French scientists, that won a DARPA project, and that became Siri, and now implemented by Apple. That was the first time. It was 2004 that actually people were thinking about how can we command a machine with the voice. We have another example, which is autonomous cars. Waymo, that a lot of people talk about, these autonomous cars driving to the city of, the roads of San Francisco, the streets of San Francisco, was actually a DARPA program in 2005, Autonomous Driving Challenge, in the desert of Nevada, that was won by a German guy, Sebastian Thrun. So many times...
It's a challenge. It's not a program, it's a challenge.
Well, we can play with words. It's basically, why is it often called a challenge? Because there is a clear objective. In the case of the autonomous driving, it was, can you drive autonomously 100 miles and achieve the goal? In the case of Siri, it was a program saying, can we use voice and to actually have interaction with your devices? And what is really incredible with DARPA is that they didn't succeed in everything. Actually, they failed in most of the attempts, because it's often hard, but they were always very good at anticipating what would become important. The GPS for geolocalization, internet for the global communication network, autonomous driving, we talked about that. We can talk about stealth, furtivity. We can talk about the MEMS, the memory chips. We can talk about many. We can even talk that the first program that was launched to create very quickly vaccines on an unknown virus was a 2013, 2014 DARPA program that kind of had a prescient of what would happen to us during the COVID crisis. And guess who was one of those who won this DARPA program at that time? It was Moderna, also run by a French guy based in Boston.
So basically what they do is putting some challenge and try to be sure that there would be some failure. Because if they don't fail enough, that means that they don't push enough to something which is not sure. That's it?
Indeed. I mean, there is a little bit this myth. I've never been able to have a formal confirmation of that, is that basically at DARPA, if more than 20% of their program reach the initial target, they consider that actually they have not pushed the frontier far enough. So it's a slightly different approach that what you hear typically in venture capital. You know, in venture capital, you hear sometimes you are okay to lose 8 or 9 out of your 10 portfolio companies, because the 9th or 10th will make it so big that it will reimburse the rest. It's different. Here, it's an attitude of saying, when it's something that can be invested by equity, by a venture capitalist, then this is not a DARPA, it's not a JEDI program. A JEDI program is something where today the business case is not clear, so you cannot make a business out of it. So the private sector won't touch it for good reasons, because the business case is not clear. But where we think that, number one, we are not far from a breakthrough, provided we put concentrated efforts. These concentrated efforts is what we call our programs. And secondly, where we believe that breaking this bottleneck would have a huge societal or strategic impact. So 2 things in what I say. One, we focus. So we try to go against a bit the tendency we see a lot in Europe of spreading too thin, financing thousands of programs. We think some programs are more important than others.
Financing everyone.
Basically financing everyone and pleasing everyone.
So you focus.
We focus.
Few programs,
yeah.
Only few. And?
So we focus and we try to ask the right question. And this is not trivial. When you look at, it's a little bit like a math problem. You never, when you're in math or when you're in philosophy, you never spend enough time to ask yourself, okay, but what is the real problem we're trying to solve? Take the example of AI, where obviously we have incredible European scientists all over the big tech. The question we should ask ourselves, why are they with Meta, with Google, with OpenAI, and not all working in Europe? Because in these environments, they are basically challenged on the hardest problem facing humanity. And I think that is what we want to do, is we want to focus the best brains on the real important problems of our time. Again, in the energy sector, you can talk about fusion energy, you can talk about life sciences.
We will talk about that.
We'll talk about it.
So first, that was the first episode for the week, which was how DARPA is different of other research organisms. That was the first program, and next week we will talk. We will talk about how the DARPA program will be converted into the JEDI. So we're still with André to talk about what is JEDI and what is DARPA, and the tech in Europe. This is still the pilot beta program, and we still are talking in English. And if you listen another language, it's deepfake, and we know it. So
and we approve this message.
And we approve the message. And I hope I have a good Italian. As we see last week, JEDI is inspired by the DARPA agency. How does JEDI is different of the DARPA program? Because DARPA is financed by basically the army, isn't it?
DARPA is financed by the Department of Defense for 2 reasons. One is because in our modern democracies, the only place where you have often a multi-year approach, a long-term approach, is the defense budget, which is the only one that does not obey the yearly rule of budget. You have this long-term planning. And secondly, in the US, it's very particular because basically everything is about national security. So everything which is strategic. What we transferred is, number one, is we don't focus on defense technologies. We focus on energy, life sciences, space, and computing as a whole. Point number one. But let's face it, today everything is weaponizable. So everything is strategic. We could see that with the vaccines. We could see that with space. We can see that even with
water
with life
energy.
Sciences and energy.
We were together in Singapore like 10 days ago, And basically, Singapore is a country where they fear that their big neighbor will cut the energy and water. And they try in a very small territories to become independent or not dependent of one only a provision. So they try to do this kind of stuff. So basically, energy is a weapon, life science is a weapon, water is a weapon. So you can weaponize everything, and that's the basic of the idea. And it's very interesting because we just got out of a breakfast that we will not disclaim everything we discuss about, but about the information.
I mean, information today is weaponizable when we can see how the role of that social media play in the formation of our political opinion. So point number one is we focus on these three, I would say, civilian topics. And secondly, we came to the conclusion that starting something we do with this very different approach, non-bureaucratic approach, would be very difficult to start within the administration. So we started that as a foundation. So it's not privately, there are no private interests within JEDI. It's something that we do for the common good, for the European as a whole. We include the UK and we include Switzerland and Norway in what we do, for the European continent. But we do it outside as a foundation because we realized that if you try to change the way the administration works with its procedures, with its procurement rules, and unfortunately sometimes with its slowness, at the moment where you need agility, where you need boldness, and when you need capacity to take risks, we started it outside. It's really you can call it an unknown political object, JEDI, because basically we do something what the state or the EU should do. We don't criticize what has been done, but we consider that the current goals of the French or German research programs, or even at the EU level, don't have the boldness and the sense of urgency that is required. And what is incredible is that we've seen that since a couple of years, and now very famous and reputable people, be it Jean Tirole, Nobel Prize in Economy, or Draghi, that cited JEDI in its latest report, or Letta, or now a couple of days ago, Christine Lagarde, all call for a wake-up call in Europe because we are basically losing the train. So JEDI is to do that. Our roadmap, just to finish on that, our roadmap is to start it outside, to have the agility and the boldness, and obviously to scale it with the support of enlightened politicians that will say, we have our traditional programs, okay, they are bureaucratic, but at least they do the main job. But for disruptive innovation, to allow Europe to leapfrog, to build the future and not just to be in a catch-up game, we need a speedboat, and we're going to help the speedboat to scale. So will I still be financed by philanthropy and in 2 years, or will JEDI be scaled by public money? That's completely open and flexible.
I think there is something important there is in every traditional democracy, there is this idea of centralization and saying at some point that we need to be sure of what we do, and there is one way to do stuff. And one of the important way that JEDI does is to say, maybe there is another solution. Maybe there is 2 ways, 3 ways. Anyway, when a topic is so important than energy, maybe we can have different strategy, and maybe the best win, and for the greater good. And it's something that is very important to make understandable by the citizens, but also by the politician, is sometimes you need to have different strategy. When I have done the Maker, it was something because we were time constrained, and at the end of the day, we always are time constrained. It was one of the points. We were exploring 3 or 4 solutions to the same problem at the same time, and every 2 or 3 hours, make the assessment and which one is promising and which one we kill right now, refocusing our resources to the next one. And with the idea of JEDI making losing bets because we're making real bets and not something we are sure of, but we're making real bets. It's maybe the ability to refocusing money right now because our resources, money and brains, because basically the brains are more constrained resources than money to the good project. Isn't the way it can be pushed and explained to the political leaders?
We try to actually adapt to the world in which we are. The world in which we are is a world where we have lost the capacity to anticipate because the acceleration of crisis, the famous polycrisis that add to each other, make it extremely complicated to anticipate. And what we realized, be it with the Ukraine war, be it with the COVID pandemic, is that when you are reacting, first, you're always too late. And I would say a third crisis is the emergence of generative AI, and particularly of OpenAI, which took Europe by surprise. And we know that if we're taken by surprise, it's more costly.
It takes Europe by surprise, but a large number of engineers are European in this team.
First, a large number of engineers are European, and secondly, that means that we didn't do our homework, because I remind everybody who is listening that the first paper on LLMs and transformers in particular was a 2018 paper, and that was published. So the fact that people said in November 22, when OpenAI started publicly, that it was a surprise, is just that we were a little bit probably sloppy in our work. So half of the work at JEDI is bringing together the best brains in 40 different topics, from fusion to semiconductors to synthetic biology, and permanently bringing them together every quarter, permanently assessing where are we in the current technological advance and where could be some breakthroughs in the next months and years to come. So kind of having this foresight, that allows us to ask the right questions, I mentioned before, and then to focus, because if you focus, you need to make sure that you ask the right questions to focus on the big bets to do. And then last point, instead of saying the future of AI will be LLMs, well, nobody knows. Actually, more and more people think that LLMs is just one step, and that maybe the future will be on different ways of doing artificial intelligence. On semiconductors, where the dependency of Europe is huge too, will the future be von Neumann architectures like you see currently with NVIDIA? Will it be neuromorphic? Will it be optic? If you bet only on one, you're quasi sure you will lose. What we need to do is to make selected bets and parallel bets. And that's why, that's my last point, we need very strong technological competence among those who are running these programs. And unfortunately today...
So that's the point, the HR managing the program in both DARPA and the inspiration you take it at JEDI is someone very technical.
Yeah, these are the so-called program managers. And the incredible thing at DARPA, I mean, it's an agency running with close to $4 billion in budget. You have 75 program managers. Each of them have 2 or 3 staff. So it's an agency with 200 people, not 250 people and more. It's very, very small, very small. So
for the whole US.
For the whole US.
And right now in the JEDI,
and we have currently 8 program managers. So we begin to be at the level and to focus on these program managers. They are often, they're always very strong scientifically or technically in terms of competence. They have a great curiosity because we see that most of the disruptions currently happen at the intersection of different disciplines. And look at the recent Nobel Prize in chemistry. These are computational scientists, 2 from DeepMind, who basically won the chemistry. So chemistry, computation, is Tesla a software and automotive company? I mean, we see that real disruptions happen at the intersection. Second point is curiosity. And the third point, it needs to be somebody who is opinionated. That means who is ready to say, okay, I believe in this or I don't believe in this. And this profile, opinionated, very curious, and knowing well the ecosystem, and very strong scientifically, is very rare to find in the same persons. That's why these organizations, DARPA or JEDI, are actually based on, it's an inverted pyramid. The director is just coordinating, but the key people are these program managers. And I think this is something which is very difficult to understand in our traditional research program, which are often too much either top-down or purely bottom-up. I mean, there are a couple of European programs, I just want to mention that, who are excellent. The European Research Council is one of them. But it's purely bottom-up. You're a great scientist, you go there, and if your project is interesting, you get funded. We need to keep these programs. But the problem, it does not allow to focus on certain societal and strategic challenges that we have.
And when you say it's opinionated, it's something important, I think. In most of recent democracy, with the transparency and something which is a voluntarism or making very transparent for the citizen, the personal opinion of someone which have dedicated his life to the public servant is basically crushed. You ask them to do a decision that cannot make any contestation, and you crush the decision of this guy. With this, when you say the program manager is opinionated, his opinion is actually listened, so he can say, we stop the program or we don't go there because I don't trust this technology. I'm able to understand the technology and I say, no, this is not the way, we refocus on that. That's it?
I will give you the example of what happens again during COVID. Before 2020, there was a scientist that got the Nobel Prize, Kathleen Carrico, that was working on RNA. And RNA, I mean, nobody really believed in it. She had a postdoc and was basically alone in her lab in Penn State. Then COVID happened. The rest is history now. And I mean, some people that are
maybe
in this
you can explain the history, because maybe some of the listener will not get what is the history. So,
well, the history is to say that, I mean, traditional vaccine production was done with developing basically reduced versions of the pathology and then injecting that so that your body would produce your antibodies yourself. With RNA, we basically engineered to produce for us and to do that at scale. I mean, this is a very, very simplified version. But the paradox is that today, in 2024, when you do vaccines today that are not RNA-based, again, you have a very difficult time to get funding. So we do the same mistake again. We are relatively bad in our modern societies to actually include the unknown, include the black swan, include the non-linear approach to things. And we see increasingly in our disruptive world or disrupted world that crises are difficult to anticipate. So how do you include that in your program? You need to have people who are ready to take bets. And so, for example, at DARPA or JEDI, you don't have any scientific councils, because the more people, even very competent, you put around the table, the less you will be able to have a really strong outlier version. I will go even further, and I know this is a debate within the scientific community. Today, the way scientists are judged is according to the H factor, to the way they are cited by others. And so it's very, very difficult, number one, to be interdisciplinary, because each are often in their silos. And we talked about the fact that disruptions happen at intersection. And secondly, if you are not in a traditional discipline, it's very difficult to actually go to topics which are outside. And that was, by the way, the history of quantum 40 years ago, because quantum was considered a total outlier compared to traditional physics. If you hear to Alain Aspect, he will tell you the same story. It needed somebody that was very opinionated to have him work on his program. And again, the rest is history. This is what we try to basically systematize as JEDI, is to have people, basically we follow, on that one we will follow a tech giant from the US. Remember the famous word of Steve Jobs, don't tell great people what they need to do. We recruit great program managers and they tell us within certain big domains, biology, AI, or semiconductors, what are the topics that they think are the most interesting to work on.
That's a very interesting conclusion for this week. And next week we will talk about the difference of the technical readiness level. So, hi everyone, we're still with André Loesekrug-Pietri from JEDI. We're still using AI, so if we don't listen us in English, it's a deep fake and we assume it. So we discuss about the different way that the program work, and maybe it can be interesting to have different method and approach to be able to manage crisis or very large change in a society like us. One of the points I want to ask is when we say about the funding of technology, people doesn't really understand that you say that the public sector and the private sector have different kind of level. For me, one of the points was saying that there is a difference between research results, technology, and product. Can you maybe elaborate and speak about the different levels of what is this kind of stuff, and maybe linked it to something that we use in research program funding, which is a TRL, technical readiness level. So maybe it's something we can discuss a little bit there.
I mean, TRLs are used. By the way, they're coming from both the scientific community in the US and from the Department of Defense. Interestingly, some of these technology readiness level go from 1 to 10. Some go from 1 to 12. So it seems to be an objective way to measure if something is still in fundamental research in the lab, if it's already at the prototype level, or if it's already a product that can be commercialized. Basically, under 5, you are in the scientific and pure fundamental research level. Over 5 or 6, you can begin to approach the prototype. What is interesting, and that is also an inspiration we got from ARPA, is that what we see today, and I will again take the example of the pandemic, is that you have more or less a merger, not a complete merger, but at least a increased closeness between fundamental research and applied research. Again, in 2020, we saw between January 2020 and October 2020, when the first vaccines came out, you had fundamental research steps which were taken. You were then on RNA technology. Then you had applied research, for example, how to embed RNA strains on lipidic substrate, which was in order to keep the RNA alive and
not destroyed by the immunity.
And you remember how it needed to be kept at -70 in special fridges, etc. And then you had the industrialization, how you scale it and produce millions or billions of vaccine. All this happened in 8 months. So those who today still talk about fundamental research as being radically separate from applied research don't see that increasingly with the compression of time, again, the time factor, these two worlds are coming together. And what really ARPA invented and what we try to emulate...
In the same way for AI today, what does OpenAI compressing the time? It's basically like everyone is running after OpenAI because they are leading the course.
They are leading the course, and you see increasingly that privately owned companies are increasingly have a fundamental R&D budget that is similar or even larger than states. When you see what is happening in the quantum domain at companies like IBM or Google, you have fundamental research which would be relatively similar than what you see in labs like the CNRS or Jülich, or Jülich is a computing center, or Max Planck or others. So,
but with less bureaucracy and paper, because
less bureaucracy, but on the other side, these companies have their own shareholders. So how do you mix between something which is going to benefit the whole society and something which can be a game changer? But this is definitely a new phenomenon.
In the kind of research is researcher in private company does research, and reporting to the shareholders is made by someone whose job is reporting to the shareholders. And I think I remember that you tell me that Alain Aspect have some. So Alain Aspect is Nobel Prize of Physics in quantum, and basically he spent like 25 to 30% of his time in paperwork.
It's better that himself says it, but yes, what we see, maybe two things. Just to finish on this thing on fundamental versus applied research, acceleration of time will make it increasingly critical that the test by the market, the product, the industrialization has a feedback loop to research. And it's a little bit like industry and research. When you don't have, unfortunately, that is what a country like France experienced, we thought 20 years ago that we could only keep the research centers and don't need the industry. Well, when you don't have the industry, you don't have the feedback with the market, with the product that can immediately feed and generate new ideas for the new products. So you need these two things together. And increasingly in technology, if you don't have the advanced research, the scientists that are working on the new generations, you are losing the game on the industrialization. And so we need to keep these two things together.
The AI topics, basically, if you don't have the search index and the social network data set, it's complicated to do AI research. So that's why this kind of company are very closely to the industry. And that's why it's very important to make public sector and private sector work together, but more to favorize an industry to actually exist. If you want to do research on nuclear fusion or fission, you need Orano and some nuclear data plant to be able to actually see it working in production.
Which is the complexity of the world of today, is that increasingly we need to be very deep in a sector. You don't have a doctor, you don't have a cardiologist. You have a cardiologist which is focused on the left ventricle and others who are working on the tissues, etc. And on the other side, most of the challenges we are facing are transversal. And AI is a good example for a technology which is radically transversal. So having both the depth that you need to be at the forefront of science and this capacity of working as an ecosystem requires probably a radically different type of organization. And that's why where really we are hitting sometimes a wall is that our traditional administrative systems, especially government, which is probably not at the forefront of, I would say, the most advanced management, have difficulties to work along the silos. And unfortunately, I have a deep conviction in the European project, but we radically need to change the way the EU institutions are working. I give an example. I talked about energy transition. Right now, we know that energy transition is dependent on these new materials, especially rare earths that are critical for permanent magnets. If you need an offshore windmill, critical for energy transition, you need these permanent magnets. 92% of them are refined in China. We should
92%.
92%. So imagine,
understand that.
Imagine the dependency that we're building up towards China today for our Green Deal is probably much higher than the one we had with Russian gas and oil 3 years ago. But so the natural consequence should be that we have a focused research program that is concentrated on finding alternatives. Well, you have the Green Deal and the DG Climate, and you have the Director General for RTD. They don't really talk to each other. They will tell you they talk to each other, but the work program of the DG RTD is there for 7 years, for 2020 to 2026. Very difficult to change. So this unagility is really crippling our capacity to be agile at the moment where, one, you need to be agile, and if you are not, again, at the forefront, others will impose their technology, their future, and we will lose our sovereignty. It's a sovereignty, it's a democratic challenge that we are facing.
And for me, there is also a question of a culture, because when you speak about high magnetic materials, every engineer in the room understands immediately the impact. But if you talk to someone which is, I don't know, historian aggregate, for example, you will have someone which say, okay, cool, it's magnet. I put it on my fridge. But don't really understand what is the current implication of what you say about it. And I think we still need to switch a little bit the cultural challenge of Europe, which are the people managing the research are not researchers.
Well, this is one of our side projects, is how do we ensure that we ramp up what we call technological intuition or understanding of our political leaders, because increasingly science and technology is core to, we talked about economy, geopolitics, future of our democracies. And if you don't understand these topics, it's very difficult to set up the right regulation, to take the good decisions. I will be very straightforward, and I'm not going to make a lot of friends with saying that, but when in the DG competition, which has to make decisions on mergers and acquisition, 85% of a team is made from lawyers, it's very difficult for them to understand the technological understanding. I give an example which is really for me incredible. In 2014, when Facebook, Meta now, acquired WhatsApp, there is a sentence, page I think 116 of DG Comp's decision allowing that merger or that acquisition, saying WhatsApp is not in competition with Facebook Messenger. I mean, it's written black on white. So that means I'm not calling for only scientists. It's great to have lawyers, but you need diversity. When you see that out of the 27 heads of state at the EU, only one has a scientific background, we have an issue. And unfortunately, you see our value opponents or our adversaries in non-democratic systems, unfortunately, are very often made of leaders who have more an engineering background. We are calling for something like in the US, which is called the Office of Science and Technology. Yeah. It's in the famous West Wing that everybody knows in the White House. You have 120 PhDs in different fields who are advising the president on the CHIPS Act, the synthetic biology strategy. And these are not 150 pages. These are 5, 10, 15 very strategic and scientifically sound documents that allows to have a clear vision.
But it's the opinion of the guys which have been selected to be there. And I think there is 2 points there. It's have a scientific background and make trust to someone you selected to his scientific background. Because there is something I often say, that every founder or manager of one of the big tech in the US have always been a PhD or an engineer. Always. Even Eric Schmidt have a PhD from Berkeley Science and have written Lex. It's not the commercial guys who help the two youngs, you know. So basically what we need is to be able to trust some engineer. I have one question before to go to the next part of our conversation. In every big tech we see today, which are the top 10 companies valuation in the world, does any one of them have not been in contract with DARPA?
I don't obviously know, because DARPA contracts are not public in many cases, but they're often talked about. I would make a bet that no. I think all of them have been in touch, because I mean DARPA is not huge in terms. I mean, it's a lot of money, and we expect and hope we'll have the same kind of budget. But I mentioned to you what I really believe. I don't think it's a question today of money. It's a question of approach, asking the right question, trusting the right persons, and considering speed as important. We desperately need that in Europe. But DARPA has always been basically at the cutting edge. It also inspired. I mean, you have an organization within Alphabet, Google, that is called Google X, which is called the Moonshot Factory. By the way, we at JEDI, we call ourselves the European Moonshot Factory, which is here to help Alphabet and the two founders to really think about, you know, what could come next. And you see increasingly a lot of organizations who are there, and they don't do that only to be, to have a societal contribution. And I don't know how many industrialists will listen to that, but I think increasingly for our large industrialists, you don't have the traditional innovator dilemma. You need to ensure that you are creating the future and the future product, the future business models. Otherwise, others will do it, and it can happen very fast. I mean, look at what's going on in my other country. I'm both French and German. In Germany, look at how we are looking almost in real time at the, I hope it's not the disappearance, but at the crash of the automotive industry. I mean, 2 years ago, they were still having record numbers. We see that in real time. I think this acceleration is something that people see with a lot of, I mean, they're petrified. Our message is positive, is to say, taking the example of OpenAI, Europe for 15 years has tried to create a competitor to Google. So we tried, basically to play a catch-up game to do, keyword search. Well, OpenAI came with a radically different approach of saying, okay, let's do more natural language, prompt engineering, etc. And they made Google search looking a little bit has been. I trust Google will catch up and will have its own model, but still it has that.
Google is struggling for its life right now.
Absolutely, and we should ask ourselves, why have we not been able, despite the Plan Villani, the AI money that was invested by the EU and other countries, why has this generative AI not been created? And so we should ensure, and I could say the same, I think all our viewers have seen these incredible images of Starship coming back. It's the same thing is happening in space. How do we ensure that Europe invents the future?
Can I say just something important about space, and just right now? Today, the guy who is managing Ariane Espace is an historian.
I mean, I hope this will not be a video against historians. I think we need to understand our past.
It's not a video against historians, but at some point of the tech industry, you need to be able to go to the factory and understand why every piece is there. And when I have done some industry, I have basically printing myself the stuff once or two, and after you give it to workers that are better than you, much fast, more precise. This is not the point. You need to understand what you do.
I mean, your point is super important. We believe at JEDI that we have entered this world of big bets. And if you want to make bets, you need to be able to understand what is possible today and what could be possible tomorrow. If you don't understand it, you will, of course, remain relatively conservative. And like somebody explained to me a couple of weeks ago, when you're in the river, I mean, you will not try to go on the banks. You will rather remain in the center. But if you remain in the center in a world that changes very quickly by leaps, you will for sure, if you don't do these bets, you will for sure lose. That means at the procurement level, at the political level, at the R&D organization levels, you need people who understand their stuff very well, but also, and I will add something that JEDI is also putting in place, you need to have people who often rotate. DARPA has this rule that the program manager has a 2-year contract, renewable once, but after 4, maximum 5 years, he's out. It's not that he's bad, but they want at all costs
to get back to the research.
To the research, but also they don't want to have people in their organization that will say, yes, but we tried that 5 years ago. I'll give you an example, which is very clear. Drone swarms, which is probably one of, if not but one of a big threat for the current defense organization, because they might radically change doctrines for naval engagement, for terrestrial engagement, etc. 5 years ago, computing power was not sufficient to have swarms that are more than a couple of drones. Today, you have swarms of 4,000, 5,000, even more drones working together. So if you had looked at this program 5 years ago, you would have said, not possible, forget it. So you need to revisit these topics. And this is going to be increasingly the case. New material science is progressing so fast that you are able to produce things that were unimaginable 2 years ago. Capacity of developing new drugs was impossible, for example, to fold proteins. That's where DeepMind made a big breakthrough. Today, you are able to understand much finer the structure, the interaction,
You're able
proteins
to fold
together.
the protein.
You're able, and this is one of the biggest, and I think you are going to have leaps in quantum, which is going again to radically change the way we look at algorithms, for example.
To conclude about this part, and before a small part about the people, to conclude about this part, maybe we can say in this research centuries, which is the technical leap, which is exponential today, what you need is to be confident about this technology, and that's basically what drives the 10 more profitable, the 10 more valuable company of this world. So, until next week, André.
I see you next week, Quentin. On this thing on technology, I think it's super important. I talked about the fact that we need not to do, and that is probably an opportunity for Europe, is not to do technology for technology. We need to be able to explain to our citizens. I'm never very comfortable when I hear we have an AI strategy or we have a quantum strategy. I mean, these are tools. What are we trying to achieve for society? And I think by explaining that, number one, you get much more people behind you because they understand it's to create better drugs, is to create new type of production forms that can be done at cost in developed countries and not need to be put in developing countries and losing our industry on the way. We need to show we can do AI by consuming much less energy. I think these things are programs which are much more inspirational for our society. And that's, by the way, also where we will get support by policymakers to put also the budget that we need to put in these strategies.
So still with André Loesekrug-Pietri from JEDI.
The force is still strong with us.
And still discussing about the tech in Europe. So we are recording in English, so if you listen us in another language, that means that it's a deep fake, but we assume it.
It's a positive fake.
It's one of the points of the story is Europe need to build a reflection together, an history together, and a common debate together. And one of the points is the difference of language. So that's one of the points of this podcast, and saying that we will translate it automatically, is try to create a momentum, which will be a European momentum of the discussion. What do you think about the junction of research in Europe? And those there is some good researcher. What is the current state of where we are in Europe about the research?
Look, if we do what we do, is that we believe that we have an incredible substrate of fantastic scientists and all passionate, and we have an incredible network of universities. There has been a lot of work to create also networks of European consortia and universities. So all this, the base is there to be an incredible place to create economic value, societal value, and to ensure that actually democracies can demonstrate that they're still very relevant and very modern in the current 21st century. So the substrate is there. Then let's not be delusional, because you often hear the sentence, we have great research, but we have a difficulty to transform that into technological leaders. Clearly, we have not been able to create technological leaders in the last decades, but even on the research, we have to be careful. When you look at the top 1% cited papers, which is really not just the number of scientific papers, but the ones which are the most cited, those who are the reference in their field, all the big European countries are actually declining in the ranking. So even on research, we have to be careful that we ensure that the best researchers still do that in Europe. And then last but not least, I think we need to make this connection. It's not about mercantilization. It's not about making out of every research a product. I believe that not everything is about startups. Everything should be about excellence. But we should ensure that the purpose that we're giving, every scientist wants to have an impact. That is something that you see with every scientist. They don't want necessarily to do a product with what they do, but they want to have the feeling that they had a contribution to the society. So you have curiosity research, but you have increasingly what we call purpose-driven research. Is Can we solve some of the big challenges that are facing us? And this is always starting with putting assumption, a question, what if, and then testing it and experimenting. This is the scientific method. By the way, a side word on that, AI is going to revolutionize science. That is our belief at JEDI, is that AI will allow us, probably scientists, to ask questions which are even more iconoclast and new and broaden our horizon. And it's going to allow us to experiment much faster. Think about clinical trials. Think about mathematical assumptions and validation. Think about biology. We just talked about that. I think AI is going to fundamentally accelerate science, and that's why it's so motivating.
Do you think that there is people in Europe we need to talk to? Because this podcast is about finding the good researcher, the good entrepreneur, the good technician that will make European technology. And do you think there is people we need to talk to?
I would have two messages. One is we are looking for these program managers that we talked in the previous episode, people that are passionate about the topic and that want to have an impact not just on one project but on several projects.
So if they can apply on JEDI website?
They go to jedi.foundation, and we are really looking for these people because an organization like ours is exactly that's our base. Our fundament is these program managers. We look for people in AI, we look for people in synthetic biology, we look for people in materials, we look for people in fusion. Any topic, if you're good, please apply. And the second thing is a clear message to policymakers, because I mean, what we are doing is actually usually done by the state. Because again, there is no business case in muchos, not at the beginning. And we should avoid in Europe being the continent of reports, of assessments, of calls for action, but without the execution capability. Today, we are in a world where execution matters, where action matters, where boldness matters, where you are sure that you lose if you don't take action. You're not sure to win, but if you don't take action, you're sure you will be on the losing camp. And I think Europe is too often, I mean, think about the Draghi report. The Draghi report on industrial competitiveness was ready in May, June 2024, was only published in September 2024.
So we lose
3 months
more than
later.
a quarter?
It's talking about an existential moment for Europe. We are early November, we are November 2024, nothing has happened. This is unacceptable. I think policymakers who are not taking actions with that sense of urgency are unfortunately making the life of current generations, but also of future generation of European much, much harder. So I think we need to and so that's my second call. So get action and take some risks. The call that we have for policymakers is saying, you put 95 billion in Horizon programs for European research, put 1% of this amount, 1%, in initiatives like JEDI or others that are going to have a radically different approach. At best, we will win because we will make some disruptions and everybody will be happy. And even if we don't win immediately because we are addressing the hardest problem, it's going to put pressure and make the 90, I talked about 95 billion, 94.1 remaining billion that you put in traditional program more efficient, because there will be a little bit of competition. There will be a little bit of emulation. The worst is when you have guaranteed budgets and with zero or very little impact assessment. So that's my second message. Policymakers, be bold, especially if you want to have a good use of your financial budgets and resources. And the third thing is to civil society, philanthropy. What is European philanthropy doing? When you have Eric Schmidt putting billions, Bezos putting billions, John and Ann Durr funding with 1 billion the Stanford Durr School of Sustainability. Where are the European philanthropists? You have a couple of them in the UK and Sweden, that are a bit in France, but very little. But I think civil society cannot expect everything from the state. It needs to step up because it's an existential challenge. We're working with them. We're very happy to make more. So civil society, don't just wait for the state to do everything. Policymakers, be bold and have a little bit of courage to use your budget in a much more efficient way. And for the greatest scientists, JEDI is your home.
That's a very interesting point. Now we have discussed a lot about with you and discuss more and discovering what JEDI does. I have another question. Say, who are you, André? Not the people understand what you are doing and what you are fighting for. How do you become what you are? So, where do you come from, and what have you done before in your life?
Look, it's always difficult to talk about yourself, but as I mentioned, I'm a European, not only by heart but almost by DNA. My father is from Berlin, so from northern Germany. My mom is from the south of Corsica, so the most southern tip of metropolitan France, Mediterranean. So I'm a pure product of friendship treaty between France and Germany, you know, the arch enemies for the last centuries in Europe. And I think this is a symbol that sometimes you can overcome that, and that's why I'm still a strong believer in mankind. So that's my base. So I'm a European, north, south. So sometimes I talk with my hands. Sometimes I'm more the cliche northern Europeans. Secondly, I have a training that is both scientific. I started my career with Airbus. I attended classes at Super Aero Engineering School, so aerospace engineering. I also did business and economic studies. I studied a bit in France. I grew up in Africa because my two parents were were from two nationalities, so they were expats. So I also have been very quickly exposed to international environments. I had the opportunity to start with industry, with Airbus, but then some industrialists asked me to run their industrial family offices. So that brought me into I would say, the technology industrial investment space. One of these families asked me to do the same in Asia, which I did not know, but that was my discovery 20 years ago. And I spent almost 10 years in Asia, and particularly in Vietnam, and then based in Beijing. And probably what I do now is a direct consequence of that, because I think we still, in Europe, underestimate how much non-democratic countries are using science and technology to leapfrog and to sometimes impose their values or try to find an alternative world order. The question is not to impose, but I think we need to be proud of our democratic system. I still believe in it, but I think democratic systems should not be. They don't need to be slow. They don't need to be. They can be much more agile, and I think we need to reinvent democracy. That is the conviction I forged when I was in China. I was basically accompanying European companies in using the scale of China and of Asia. In 2017, I had really a career change, because when the French president was elected, the defense minister asked me to join its cabinet. So I was in charge of several things, including the European defense strategy and technological sovereignty. That was a word which was completely new in 2017. And this is how I got in touch with DARPA, and very quickly made the proposal to our policymakers at the European level. At that time, it was European Commissioner Moedas, as well as with many others. We made a proposal to the president to create a European version of DARPA. Interestingly, in the Sorbonne speech, which was the fundamental Europe speech of the president in 2017, there was this call for, I want to set up a European DARPA. 8 years later, we are still seeing calls, but not real action. And therefore, since I'm more in strategy, but also an action-oriented person. 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we set up JEDI saying, okay, we cannot just wait. Let's do an entity that will be kind of a life experiment, a precursor to this agency. And this has grown. I mean, we are now 6,000 people, 43 hubs all over Europe, and several active programs. So it's working, but now we need everybody to kind of come together and ensure that Europe remains relevant. I mean, that is you asked about my personal passion. I mean, my personal mission is how do we ensure the European values, way of life, approach remains relevant in the 21st century. So it's a huge ambition, obviously.
It's a very interesting ambition, and it's a very interesting Parker, because you know that it's interesting to see how the career of people can sculpt them and creating the way they work today. So that's a very interesting point. Just because there is something I always want to fight is, you know, when the people are looking at something, they say American technology, which is very, you know, post-Marshall Plan expression, saying that we don't know how to do it in Europe, but you know, the Americans know. Do you know few example you have of technology which are European but sold by the American?
Well, you have many examples. I mean, and the most notorious example is the IP protocol. I mean, this was basically developed at the Center for Nuclear Research, CERN, but it was then scaled, popularized by Al Gore. You remember the so-called founder of the internet. We remember his sentence, and then turned into reality and products by tech giants that emerged end of the 90s and early 2000s, Google being obviously one of them, because the search engine was basically an eye into the internet that was created. That's, I think, the most notorious example. Many examples emerged from in the space industry, where most of the technologies. And what people don't know is that the first technical director of SpaceX was actually a German. I mentioned about the autonomous cars. Obviously, car industry has been shaped by the Europeans. The photovoltaic industry has been created in France and in Germany, but scaled in a massive way in China. And the big risk we are facing is that we were at the beginning of many of these disruptive technologies, or technologies in general, but today this capacity of scaling it gives you the means to actually invent the products of tomorrow, because it generates obviously the profit that allows you to reinvest. Think about the chip industry. I mean, today still one of the most valued company in the world is called ASML. It's producing the ultraviolet lithography machines that allow the chip makers to basically do chips which are smaller and smaller in terms of nanometers. Without this company, a company like TSMC or in Taiwan or others would not be able to exist. But we have to look at the future. But increasingly, I would say, global competitors understand that these machines, these technologies are key to create the industries of the future. So we need to remain at the forefront. We were at the forefront for many things in space. Last example, in biology, we talked about RNA and COVID. Let's not forget that those who invented the genetic scissor, which we call CRISPR-Cas9, was two fantastic female scientists, Emmanuelle Charpentier and Doudna in the US. And Emmanuelle Charpentier is French, working at the Max Planck in Germany. But 99% of the startups and companies applying CRISPR are in Shenzhen or in Boston. Why?
So maybe what we need is an ability to understand the technical leap. So for me, something important is we need to talk to the policymaker, but we also need to talk to the citizens. and people working on the tech area. And, I often say that there is two kinds of business. There is a business who can own some assets, and there is some business who can do some flow, just a flow. And the point is, many good technical people in Europe are not working on assets. And I think there is something important there, that we need to convince the people that they can work on assets and they can work on something very technical, leading by themselves. So good technical people, you can be program manager at JEDI, but you can also be entrepreneur and creating very interesting stuff. So you can be searcher, you can be entrepreneur. So if you want to change the stuff, you need to create assets. Assets are creating by creating research, technology, then product. And I think that if we talk to the good European people about that, maybe we can do something great there. So that's one of the points maybe we can do. If you agree, we will check on JEDI a little bit later. And I want to thank you a lot to accept my invitation for this very pilot episode of this new podcast. What I ask for the people, if does this have been interesting? Do you have learned something? Was the idea of AI great? And I very open to question. If you think there is someone I need to interview, there will be a form. So you just send me some contacts, and I will be reaching to you, and we will try to get to the people we need to interview and do something like that. So thank you very much for listening through us, and have a very good day. Thank you, André.
Thank you, Quentin. Great podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening Opening Voices. This was our final part interview with André Loesekrug-Pietri from JEDI. I hope you enjoy it. We will continue new interview, new leaders, new innovators inside Opening Voices. So please subscribe to our channel or our podcast, and see you later.